Alright, so we are on to Act 1, Scene 4. I will do what I usually do. I'll read through the scene and then I will go through it, analyse it, explain it, make some contextual links, and highlight any of those key quotes that come up. If you remember, just before this, we had Macbeth and Banquo were greeted by Ross and Angus, and during that it was told to Macbeth that he was to be the Thane of Cawdor now, and that's the first of the witch's prophecies come true. So Macbeth already is starting to think about becoming king, and we are now moving on to this next scene where actually King Duncan speaks to Macbeth and Banquo, gives them thanks for everything that they've done, and then announces that his son Malcolm will succeed him on the throne, and that's all summarised here on the side if you remember. So as I said, I will read through and then I will go through and analyse and highlight key information. As usual, I will just read through. I won't identify who is speaking unless, of course, there are a group of people speaking at that point. Okay, so the King's headquarters, there's a flourish. Enter King Duncan, Lennox, Malcolm, Donalbain and attendants. Is execution done on Cawdor? Are not those in commission yet returned? My liege, they are not yet come back, but I have spoke with one that saw him die, who did report that very frankly he confessed his treasons, implored your highness's pardon, and set forth a deep repentance. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. He died as one that had been studied in his death, to throw away the dearest thing he owned, as to a careless trifle. There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. Enter Macbeth, Banquo, Ross and Angus. O worthiest cousin, the sin of my ingratitude even now was heavy on me. Thou art so far before that swiftest wing of recompense is slow to overtake thee. Would thou hadst less deserved that the proportion both of thanks and payment might have been mine. Only I have left to say, more is thy due than more than all can pay. The service and the loyalty I owe in doing it pays itself. Your highness's part is to receive our duties, and our duties are to your throne and state, children and servants, which do but what they should by doing everything safe towards your love and honour. Welcome hither. I have begun to plant thee, and will labour to grow thee full of growing. Full of growing. Noble Banquo, that hast no less deserved, nor must be known no less to have done so, let me enfold thee and hold thee to my heart. There, if I grow, the harvest is your own. My plenteous joys, wanton in fullness, seek to hide themselves in drops of sorrow. Sons, kinsmen, thanes, and you whose places are the nearest, know, we will establish our estate upon our eldest, Malcolm, whom we name hereafter the Prince of Cumberland, which honour must, not unaccompanied, invest him only, but signs of nobleness, like stars, shall shine on all deservers. To Macbeth, so again, making note here, he's speaking now directly just to Macbeth. From hence to Inverness, and bind us further to you. The rest is labour which is not us for you. I'll be myself the harbinger, and bring and make joyful the hearing of my wife with your approach, so humbly take my leave. My worthy Cawdor. Aside, so again, this is Macbeth now speaking to himself, telling the audience really how he feels. The Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down or else overleap, for in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand, yet let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see. True, worthy Banquo, he is full so valiant, and in his commendations I am fed. It is a banquet to me. Let's after him, whose care is gone before to bid us welcome. It is a peerless kinsman. Flourish, exuit. Okay, so as I said, I will now go through it and just explain what's happening in that scene, and make some notes as I'm going through, and I will highlight some of those key quotes. So, We've got the directions there. The flourish just means that you've got the information there, so it's a fanfare, so the trumpet's calling to sort of show that the king is approaching. Okay, we enter into this scene with a question. So there's lots of scenes where we enter and we've got these interrogatives. So maybe again showing the kind of uncertainty, the state of the kingdom at that point, because obviously there's just been an attempt at an invasion. So it's almost like this idea then, the theme of order and disorder, even from the beginning of this scene, we have this sense of disorder because there is confusion with these interrogatives that are being asked about, obviously, the state of the kingdom and about what's happening in the kingdom. So we get that sense even in these opening lines of these scenes. So Malcolm then speaks to his father, King Duncan. "My liege, they are not yet come back, but I have spoke with one that saw him die." So they're talking now about Cawdor, and obviously Duncan's asking, has Cawdor been executed yet? And those who were responsible in charge of it, and you've got those notes over here, have they returned back yet from doing that? So Malcolm is sort of replying, "No, they're not back yet, but I've spoken with someone who saw him die, who did report that very frankly he confessed his treasons, implored your highness pardon, and set forth a deep repentance." So Cawdor, the original Thane of Cawdor, the one that Macbeth inherits the title from, he now has been executed, and before his death he was sorry for what he'd done, and he repented for it. So he asked to be forgiven for what he's done. "Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. He died as one that had been studied in his death, to throw away the dearest thing he owned, as to a careless trifle." So he was dignified in his death. They saw it as quite honourable that he confessed to what he'd done, and he'd kind of faced what was sentenced for him, and there's sort of an honourable feel to that, and that's quite important because actually there's almost a sense of parallelism there. So at the very end, with Macbeth's death, he chooses at the very end, when he's talking to Macduff in that final scene of his death, he sort of decides that he's going to fight and he's going to face his death as a warrior. So even though he realises that the witches had equivocated, they'd kind of told him the truth, but it wasn't really the full story, he decides to face his death as a soldier, in battle. So there is almost an honour to that, and there's almost an echoing of that here through that parallelism. So we have another character who faces his death with dignity and chooses to kind of to face that and realises what he's done. And Macbeth kind of does that as well. He realises what he's become, and there's an element of him sort of accepting what he's done and realising that Macduff could potentially kill him then, because actually he wasn't born of woman, and he chooses then to face the odds of that, realising that the odds are against him. So we have that parallelism there. So a really important quote here, and this is one that I am going to highlight: "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust." So there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. So we have the theme of appearance versus reality here, because what he's saying is that there's no way to say what someone's thinking by just looking at their face, and that's kind of explained here for you. There's no way of telling what's in a man's mind just by looking at his face. The truth of this judgment may be demonstrated many times during the play. So this is true throughout the play. It's very difficult to know what the characters are thinking, and especially with Macbeth, because obviously a lot of his thoughts are deceptive is probably the best word I'm thinking of, actually. So he's very deceptive in the sense that he presents himself one way and then is actually thinking other things, and whether he's doing that of his own free will or whether that's because Lady Macbeth has kind of hounded him into behaving like that, that sort of happens throughout. So we have then this sort of link, this key quote about appearance versus reality, and the idea of not being able to really know what somebody's thinking just by looking at them. And we've got a bit of irony here. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. And we could question here Duncan's faith in others, because actually he then builds his trust on Macbeth. And clearly he's not somebody who he should be building an absolute trust on, because we know later on he actually ends up killing Duncan. So we can question that as well. It's almost like irony there. And it maybe foreshadows what happens with Macbeth, because Macbeth ultimately ends up betraying him as well. So it sort of foreshadows Macbeth's treason there as well. And ironically, again, the stage directions here, I mean, the structural choice of having Macbeth, his character, enter at this point, I mean, it's just, there's some almost like dark humour in that as well. So as he's saying, you know, oh gosh, that Thane of Cawdor who I've just had executed for treason, he was a man on whom I built an absolute trust, and then in comes Macbeth, who's the new Thane of Cawdor, who is also somebody he trusts, who will later betray him. So that there's almost a dark irony there. And again, we've got this description of Macbeth, which we can highlight. Oh, worthiest cousin. So the sin of my ingratitude even now was heavy on me. So, you know, he feels like he can't thank him enough for what he's done. Thou art so far before the swiftest wing of recompense is slow to overtake thee. So he's sort of laying on lots of praise here, sort of suggesting how much Macbeth has done for him, that he doesn't even know where to start to thank him. Wouldst thou hast less deserved that the proportion both of thanks and payment might have been mine. So again, I wish you deserved less, so that my rewards might be in proportion. So again, like I said, it's just emphasising he feels he should, or wishes he could do more to repay Macbeth and what he's done for him in winning that battle. Only I have left to say, more is thy due than more than all can pay. So I owe you more, and I literally can't repay you for what you've done for me. So Macbeth then, this is interesting because we have this sense of Macbeth then being two-faced at this point. Obviously you don't want to write that in your exam, but we definitely have this deceptive element to Macbeth, okay? Because he's saying the service and loyalty I owe in doing it pays itself. So it's its own reward. It's the right and good thing to do, and I am glad to do it because it's the right thing to do. Your Highness's part is to receive our duties, and our duties are to your throne and state. So interestingly, there is almost ironically a link to the divine right of kings, because he's talking about the role of the king. And he's saying that, you know, it's your duty to receive these honours, for us to defend our country for you, and to protect you, and to look after the throne. And ironically, he's going to destroy that later on. He's going to go against that. Your children, your servants. So again, there's lots of praise going back and forth between them. But again, like I said, this is very ironic because, again, there's almost that contextual link to this belief that there is a set role for everyone in society. And I'll just make a short note there of great chain, but it links to that idea of the great chain of being. So this like hierarchy then, with the king at the very top, and it's the duty of those beneath him to sort of protect him and do things then to serve him. Which do but what they should by doing everything safe towards your love and honour. So again, you've got the notes here. So it is no more than our duty to do everything we can to protect your love and honour. So Duncan then, so welcome hither, I have begun to plant thee and will labour to make thee full of growing. So again, a good quote there to kind of enforce that, you know, he's going to, it's that imagery. So we've got this imagery here, this metaphor, I have begun to plant thee and will labour to make thee full of growing. So he's already given him a new title. He's promising to sort of recognise him more in the future as well. Noble Banquo, thou hadst no less deserved, nor must be known, nor less to have done so. Let me enfold thee and hold thee to my heart. So he praises Banquo here as well, and he hugs him. So enfold thee and hold thee to thy heart, to my heart. So he embraces him, and again sort of realises that Banquo is of the same sort of level as Macbeth, really. But Banquo there is much simpler reply. He doesn't Macbeth is really kind of sucking up to the king there, whereas Banquo there, if I grow, the harvest is your own. So kind of suggesting that anything that Duncan gives to him, he's going to be thankful for it, and he realises that any success he has will be thanks to Duncan. So Duncan then replies again. It's almost hyperbolic, particularly through this kind of emotive language. My plenteous joy, so my lots and lots of joy that I'm feeling, wanton in fullness. So again, there's lots of it. It's quite lavish in fullness. Seek to hide themselves in drops of sorrow. So he's so happy he could cry. So I'm just going to make a note of that as well, because again, there's lots of almost like hyperbolic. It's just very much sucking up to each other. So you've got hyperbole there. It really sort of goes over. It's almost quite dramatic there. So hyperbole, sorry. Emotive language, so happy he could cry. Sons, kinsmen's thanes, and you whose places are the nearest, so those who are closest to me, are closely related. No, we will establish our estate upon our elders. So here he's telling the men that he's going to pass his crown on to Malcolm. So Malcolm will become the next king. So, whom we name hereafter the Prince of Cumberland, and that's explained here, the title of the Scottish heir apparent. So it's the equivalent of, so in England the Prince of Wales is Prince Charles, and Prince Charles will become the king. So just as we have that in England, and Charles is Prince of Wales, in Scotland Malcolm then becomes the Prince of Cumberland, which means that he will then inherit the title of king when his father dies. Okay, so not unaccompanied, invest him only, but signs of nobleness like stars shall shine on all deservers. So again, he's sort of saying that those who deserve it will receive, his kind of his favour. He speaks then specifically to Macbeth, and he says, "From hence to Inverness, and bind us further to you." So he kind of invites himself to Macbeth's castle there. Tells Macbeth that tonight I'm gonna come and stay with you, to kind of keep my relationship with you close, to bind us to you further. Macbeth then, the rest is labour which is not used for you. I'll be myself the harbinger. So harbinger, the officer of the royal household sent ahead to procure accommodation for the king. So he himself will go forth to his castle and let everyone know that he is going to, that the king's going to be staying there. And make joyful the hearing of my wife on your approach, so humbly take my leave. Again, key quote here, because he's being described positively. So again, when people are talking about him at the very beginning here, he has a very good reputation. People admire him, people look up to him, people speak well of Macbeth at this point. He has a very, very good reputation. And then we have this aside, and we've seen a couple of these already with Macbeth, where he sort of reveals some of the things that are going through his mind at that point. And this is a sort of interesting bit of speech here, and we can take some quotes from this. "The Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down or else overleap." So again, we've got this metaphorical language, and it's sort of revealing to us almost his ambition at this point. because if you think about the imagery there, he's saying that he's going to have to step over this problem, which is Malcolm being named the Prince of Cumberland, meaning that he will inherit the crown when his father dies. So this is a step he must kind of overcome. This is an obstacle that he must overcome. For in my way it lies. So he realizes that he's going to have to get rid of Malcolm or overcome that in some way. So already we have kind of hints here that he is thinking about regicide, that his thoughts are not as good as we would imagine for this brave, valiant, worthy man that's being described by the people, the men around him. And a really sort of interesting quote here. So, stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. So, like I said, we've already got hints here of him not being as pure and good and noble and worthy as all these men make him out to be. And that sort of goes further here into this idea of deception. The eye wink at the hand, so wink at the hand, not see what the hand is doing, so let not his eye see what his hand is doing. And it's interesting because actually that could be seen as a biblical reference there as well. I'll make a note on that in a moment. I'll explain that more clearly. I'll just want to make a note on this first. So stars as well may be related to heaven, so you could make a biblical link there. I want to say sort of evil thoughts at this point. And that kind of juxtaposes, I'm just going to squeeze that in here. So it juxtaposes the men's opinion of him at the beginning, where they're calling him worthy, valiant, brave Macbeth. Okay, so it juxtaposes that idea, this sort of inner monologue that we're hearing. It's very different from the way that the men view him and the way they see him. This is an interesting, and the reason I said it's a biblical reference there. In the Bible, there is a fable that talks about the idea of being charitable and giving to those in need. And in the Bible it says that when you are doing something charitable, when you're doing something kind, you should do it not for praise, not for other people to see. You shouldn't make a big show of it, but actually what you should do when you're giving to somebody who is in need, if you're doing a kindness, you should do it quietly without anyone seeing, just between you and that person that you're helping them, because it's the noble and honourable thing to do. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and you should do it so that when you give money, say to someone to help them, say you give money to a beggar, you do it so secretly that not even your eyes see what you're doing. You do it and you give with your hand, and your eyes can't see what they're doing. So that's what I mean. It's almost a twist of that. It's almost a corruption of this good idea in the Bible of being so humble about giving to others and being kind and good, because God will see those good things that you do, but you don't need to show it off to everyone else. So it's almost a sort of twist on that, a biblical reference, but it's a twist on that. Okay, it's been corrupted, the way that he's kind of using it there. Yet let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see. Okay, so again, it's that twist that actually then when you look on what you've done, you'd be horrified by it, which is ironic because actually he is, because when he does kill Duncan, he actually says, "Look on it again, I dare not," and he can't go back to put the daggers back on the guards outside Duncan's room. He literally says, "Look on it again, I dare not." So it sort of fits in with that really, really well. Duncan then, true worthy Banquo. So Macbeth goes off at that point. He exits. And again, ironically, as Macbeth is thinking these horrific things, these deep and black desires, Duncan, meanwhile, is singing his praises. He is so valiant. So he's so brave. So while Macbeth is sort of saying these horrible, awful things under it, and in his own mind, under his breath there, meanwhile Banquo has been praising Macbeth to Duncan, whilst the audience was listening to Macbeth's thoughts. And in his commendations, I am fed, it is a banquet to me. So he feels full of all these recommendations, all these good things that people have said about Macbeth. And then he says, let's go after him, whose care is gone before us to bid us welcome. He cares so much about me, he thinks so much of me, that he is rushing off ahead to go home and prepare his home for me. And we know actually it's for very different reasons. He goes to tell his wife all about what's happened, and his wife kind of pushes him towards killing Duncan. It is a peerless kinsman, so suggesting that there's no one as good as him. He's a peerless kinsman. There's no one as good as him. He is without peer. There's nobody else that's as good as him. And that's where we end with that scene. But it's a really important one. There are some really key quotes there, some really, really good ones that you could use in the exam, particularly if we're talking about Macbeth's character. If we are asked about how he sort of changes and develops, and how he eventually becomes the sort of tyrant that he is by the end of the play. But we already kind of see hints of that. There is some foreshadowing that this kind of change will take place with him. But hopefully that helps. As ever, if you do need any more support or any clarification on anything, just either drop me a little message in our Google Classroom or drop me a little email.